on the recorder. And give a round of applause to Doug.
Good evening, I'm Doug, and I am an alcoholic.
Hey, Doug.
I've been sober for, I had to look it up, 13,409 days. August 3rd, 1988. And there's my beautiful daughter and granddaughter and son-in-law. I'm just one of 8.23 billion people. I had to look it up the other day. I thought it was 8, but it's 8.23. You know, where you wake up and you have to make a decision. How are you going to live this day? And some people won't even think that. It's kind of going autopilot. But through the benefits of this program and the things I've learned in here, you know, I have a plan. I have a reason for my granddaughter. So, you know, how will I live my day? So I'm going to start off, if you would indulge me for a minute here. Page 276 in the big book. The last 36 plus years of my life have been rich and meaningful. I've had my share of problems, heartaches, and disappointments, because that is life. But I have also known a great deal of joy and a peace that is the handmaiden of an inner freedom. I have a wealth of friends, and with my AA friends, an unusual quality of fellowship. For to these people, I am truly related. First through mutual pain and despair, and later through mutual objectives and newfound faith and hope. And as the years go by, working together, sharing our experience with one another, and also sharing a mutual trust, understanding, and love, without strings, without obligation, we acquire relationships that are unique and priceless. There is no more aloneness with that awful ache so deep in the heart of every alcoholic that nothing before could ever reach it. That ache is gone and never need return again. Now there is a sense of belonging, of being wanted and needed and loved. In return for the bottle and a hangover, we have been given the keys of the kingdom. And I've been given those keys. And the nice thing, and what I discovered, is the keys of the kingdom. The kingdom is right here, right now. It's nothing out in the future. Just learn how to live today. And you know, that means a lot to me. So, a little bit of my story. Karen and I were talking about it. I grew up in the oil and gas business. My dad was with a major oil field service company, and we moved a lot. By the time I graduated from high school, we'd moved 13 times. Right. So I, you know, kind of got used to the shucking and jiving and fitting in where I was as best I could. But there was always a sense of, you know, being the new guy. And I was the oldest of three, and that developed a sense of responsibility pretty quick. But I had a sense of doing the right thing regardless. My brother and sister used to call me Dudley Do-Right. And we moved to Canada, and to this day, my brother still calls me Dudley. Dudley was kind of oblivious to the world, but anyway. So we had moved from Ventura, California to New Orleans when I was going into high school. And my dad was a drinker, my mother was a drinker. But when we moved from Ventura to New Orleans, her life started coming unraveled, and consequently the whole family started coming unraveled. It was pretty bizarre sometimes. I can remember my next door neighbor probably I was in 10th grade, maybe going 11th grade, and all the chaos that was going on associated with particularly mom's behavior. She came over there and said, she called me over, her husband, Greg, and nice people, they were ex-on, and pretty centered people. And they told me about Alateen, which that time was down, the meetings were down at the Lee Circle there in New Orleans. And this was in late 60s, all right? And Lee Circle was where all the bums hung out, all right? And the thought of me going down there was just like, you gotta be kidding. And I pushed back on it. I said, you gotta, no, all right, no big deal. But that was the start of me really not wanting to be involved in anybody. I just, you push people away from that point. And, I got through. I got through New Orleans in high school, drinking and raising hell and doing the stupid things, but nothing really bad. I got lucky. I got real lucky on that part of it. But, as I was in my senior year, I was preparing for college, and I'd done pretty good on the ACTs. Probably go any place I wanted to. Dad wanted me to go to A&M. And, I said, this was in the fall. And I said, I think I'm going to go to LSU. Boy, he's an Aggie. And he's kind of like, ooh, why do you want to do that? I said, well, I'm not sure what I want to study. And he was not happy with that outlook on life at that point. But in that same fall, our next door neighbor was he was in the Marines. He was commanding officer of a helicopter squadron down there at Belchase, below New Orleans. And he invited our family to the Marine Corps Ball, which is in November 10th. Remember that date. And it's a great date. And he invited us, and I walked into that place, and there was Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Kidman standing there in his dress whites with his Marmaluke sword and his Navy Cross and medals, and this guy just I looked up to him, and there was a sergeant major standing there with all these ribbons and his dress blues, and I walked up to him and I said, I want to be one of you guys. So I joined on the delayed enlistment program in January of '72. In February, my dad came home and said, we're moving to Singapore. And I was thinking, oh man, I'm missing it again. So they, in March, 1st of March, they were gone. We sold everything we had. And my aunt just happened to be living in New Orleans, so I had a chance to live with her. And he said, good luck, have a good life. Away you go. We'll talk to you when you're down at court. And he gave me a bunch of money, gave my aunt some money to get me through, the end of the year with prom and all that stuff. He gave me the Playboy Club key that he had there, which was there in New Orleans. So I had a good time there. That lasted 3 or 4 months. But anyways, I get into boot camp, and your life is just turned upside down. They take away everything, every bit of dignity. Every bit of structure you had is gone, and they were teaching you how to learn their structure. And it was bewildering. But Colonel Pittman had kind of prepped me on it. He just said, they can't kill you. Just try to do the best you can and never give up. Never, ever give up. And that's how I started working through that. But we'd been there maybe a couple of weeks, It was Sunday morning, and this Sergeant Wilson, who was a Marine Corps drill instructor, he wasn't very tall, but he was just a squared away, drill instructor. And he came walking out of the squad bay there, or the hooch, and he was wearing a T-shirt, and which was abnormal for those guys. I mean, and before we could see all these scars that he had all over him. He had scars on his neck and on his arms and stuff like that. And Sunday morning, you have a choice to go to church. And that's what he said. He said, you know, the Marine Corps has given you the privilege of being able to go to church. And some of you guys are probably sitting there thinking, well, Marines don't go to church. And that's exactly what we were thinking. All right. So he gives and tells his story. He had been at Quezon in 1968, which was during the Tet Offensive, and during one of the numerous battles or numerous things that occurred. He had been kind of traversing the base, and there was some incoming artillery, and he was right by the ammo dump, and there was a direct hit on the ammo dump. And it, I mean, blew up. There's some video I've seen on it. It was incredible explosion, multiple explosions. But he tells the story that he was blown probably 100 yards and was laying in a water-filled bomb crater. And he said, I was screaming, my God, save me. And then he went on and said, you recruits, we weren't Marines, he said, you recruits need to develop a relationship with God. And don't have to do it the way I did. So that was God speaking. That was God speaking to me. So we beat feet down there. And I tried to go to the chapel services when they had them when we could, the rest of the time. But in that process, though, the Marine Corps, through the Gideons, had given us a Bible. And I've still got that Bible, carried around quite often. And Chaplain Freestad, who was Lieutenant Colonel at that time, gave it to me June 28th, 1972. And I still carry this, and I read it all the time, and carry it all the time. And, it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me. I was thumbing through it, and I've thumbed through it a few times. And one of the things that I was always, I underline things when I read it. And I'm looking for discernment. I'm looking for discerning words. I'm looking for wisdom. Those were the things that kept catching my eye as I was reading this through the years. And unfortunately, I'm still on that track. I'm trying to understand, get some wisdom to develop that relationship with God. So if you talk about the AA program, that was the start of my AA program, because I was seeking a relationship with God. And that's what caused a lot of the problems as I moved on. So, anyway, develop a relationship with God before you have to do it the way I did. And those were incredible words to me. So I get out of the Corps, had applied to several different schools. I was headed to SMU, and I stopped at a small school in Arkansas where a friend of mine was going to school, and I liked it. It was a small school. I was tired of being just a number, you know, kind of. I wanted to be the big man on campus. So, you know, I got a good gig there. You know, I was able to be an RA. I was able to, he got me, the dean of the school, as it turns out, was a graduate of the Naval Academy, and he was kind of reaching out, trying to grab veterans. And I didn't know that until probably 20 years after that was his background. But he helped me. He provided for some things. I had a pretty good gig there. It was a great school. I got out in 3 years. You know, I should have taken longer. In retrospect, taken my time, had some fun. But I was trying to move ahead. I was in a hurry. So I get out, or getting ready to get out. I thought about going to law school, and a friend of my dad's was an exec with Halliburton at that time. And he said, "Why don't you come to work for us for a couple of years and then go back to law school?" Well, okay. So, you know, 40 years later, I'm still an old retired. Yes, but anyway, so I went in the field for a few years, and you know, I'm drinking the whole time, but it's nothing crazy. There wasn't any crazy stuff going on. You know, nothing that, no jail, no DWIs, nothing like that. But working in oil field sales in the late 70s and 80s was a wild time. I mean, you just essentially had an unlimited expense account. You know, single. I had a great time in New Orleans. Had a great time, a lot of fun. But I was dating a few times. This is the second thing that kind of got me. So I was dating a girl, or had dated a girl that was the daughter of a friend of mine. A friend of mine had this big real estate company, and his general manager had a daughter, and she had 2 kids. She'd been divorced, and we dated for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, and then, you know, kind of in my typical manner, I just kind of walked away. And man, 3 or 4 months later, I went by to see David, and I walked in his office, and his wife came in there, and she looked at me, and she said, "You broke my daughter's heart." First time I'd ever really be confronted with my behavior. I was uncaring. I didn't care about people. I didn't care about people's feelings. It just, you know, no big deal. So that "you broke my daughter's heart" made me realize where I was and what I was doing. So that's the second part of this story, I guess. So a few months later, had a chance to blind date with a family friend, or a girl that I'd grown up in high school with. She was married to this guy, and Barb, or Jan, said, "I've got this girl you need to meet. Let's have a blind date." And so I go to pick her up, and it's this willowy, blonde, talkative, beautiful young lady, and Charlie and Jan were in the back seat, and we go over to Pascal's Manali, and we go in there, and a few of y'all been there, but there was an oyster bar, you know, kind of when you walk in to the right, and kind of an open area, the maitre d's over to the left, and you know, I knew the family, the DeFelice family that owned it. So we sat there for an hour, you know, chatting, talking, drinking beer, you know, eating oysters. And I walked across to see Bobby, and I looked back and I said, "She's the one. She's the one." Blind date. I've known her a couple hours. I said, "That's the one." And I think the I was seeking to be a better person. And in her, for some reason, I just saw something that I could be a better person for her. Not only for me, but for her as well. And, I've never looked back. I mean, she's an incredible lady and woman and wife and mother and all that good stuff. So, anyways, but after we'd been married a few times, of course, my mother had been going downhill. We'd been in and out of, been going to Al-Anon. We'd got family interventions, all that other stuff. And I was just watching her life totally disintegrate. And that was affecting me because I was wanting to control those people around me. I was trying to control that behavior. And it was just this dissonance, this conflict. I didn't realize what it was at the time, but it was just my desire to control things. I was doing the right thing. Why can't you? And when you have that, you develop a lot of anger, and that anger was getting to me. So I went to see the psychologist, and we met 3 or 4 times. Kind of a rotund guy, smoked a pipe. He looked, to me, he looked like Alfred Hitchcock. And essentially, he read the doctor, well, after we've met probably the 4th time. He said, I think you've got a drinking problem. And then he said, I think you got a drinking problem. Do you realize that alcohol contributes to depression? And I went, what? I didn't realize. I did not put the 2 and 2 together on that. I just thought, I was drinking myself into further depression, which I see quite often in people, particularly new people coming. But he read the doctor's opinion, and as he goes through, he's kind of a solemn guy, and then he said, at the end of it, he looked at me, come, and then you die. That's what it took. At that moment, my survival instinct kind of kicked in. And, I said, okay, I need to start doing something about that. So, Ray and I are married. We have 3 children. Quick. I've been in town 3 times. When Travis was 2, I'd gone out to English Turn on a Friday afternoon with some friends playing golf, T. Wayne knows some of those guys. And played golf. It was hot. There was noise. And drink a beer. Or we didn't drink beer. We went into the locker room after and started drinking beer. I do not remember leaving there. I remember waking up in a chair in my house. And right then, I said, this has got to stop. I said, this shit's got to stop. And I made the decision that I said, I need to do something. I'd been going to Al-Anon and ACOA and all of those stuff, and I didn't see the attractiveness of it. But I was so desperate for something, I said, maybe I'll try AA. And I didn't know what they did. Right? But there have been people in AA that I've run into through that circus with my mother. I said, okay, we can do something. That night, though, or that 2 o'clock in the morning when I woke up, not knowing how I got there was, I call it a spiritual experience, but for some reason I felt there was kind of a shadow across the room saying, if you want to be alone, come on over. And I don't know what it was, but I think since then I've read some things and different stuff that living hell is not someplace subterranean. hell is being on earth alone. And I believe that. I think that's, somebody was kind of beckoning me. You want to be alone? You want to not worry about anybody? Come on over here. I did. So the not to throw too much biblical stuff in there, but Genesis 32, when Jacob was wrestling with God, that's what I was. I was kind of like, how do I earn my way into your relationship with you? I was trying to earn my way into that. And in that process of wrestling, it wasn't that, this is the surrender part of the program. It wasn't that he gave up, he gave in. He gave in and acknowledged our power. God blessed him. That blessing that he accepted was him accepting God as higher power. And that's the way I felt when I came in. I said, okay, I got to do something different. I'm gonna try this. My first sponsor, I walked into those rooms there, half a block from the house, the church that we went to, and he jumped right up there, and he was an engineering professor there at Tulane, head of the department, big, tall, rangy guy. He'd been a bomber pilot in World War II, 20-year-old bomber pilot in World War II, and but it was just the right guy. So he told me some things. He said, this is a lifetime journey. All right, it's not the last time you're going to be doing these steps. All right, you're going to learn more and more as you go along. He also insisted that I write about it. Get you a journal, a notebook, whatever it is, and write about it. You got to put it down on paper. And his explanation was, all these abstract thoughts in your head don't mean anything until you get it out in a linear fashion on paper. It's the only way you can work with things is in a linear manner. I get it. And he also told me at that time, before it's real bad issues, that multitasking is bullshit. And then the other thing is that he said, in the literature you'll find things. Find a phrase that jumps out at you, that's God talking to you. Think about it, write it down. So I started doing that. I put it in my day tower, and I'd pay attention to it. So that first 4 years was trying to raise a family, had kids and sports, and all the family things. I went to 2 or 3 meetings a week if I could get there, but heavily into the program, no. Not like what happened when I moved to Houston in '92. I started going to Duncan Road, and a bunch of hard asses over there, and it was great. A Saturday morning meeting, and but out of that, the friendships I developed, creative. It was given to me a board of directors. I had a bunch of people that I was accountable to. I was accountable for my behavioral, spiritual development, with God's help, to this day. And I still have those people in my life. I'm grateful that they're the big part of my program was the 24-hour-a-day book. All right, that was the we didn't have the daily reflections or any of that crap at that time. This was the book. This was the book. Everybody had it. I mean, this thing's been around forever. But he said, find a phrase, all right, highlight it, pencil it in, write it down in your book, and then think about it. Pay attention. You can't go to a meeting every day. This book, I was calculating it the other day. I got about 1.5 million air miles on this, and 1.32 million miles of driving. But wherever I went, that was in my briefcase. It was with me all the time. So it's well traveled. I paid attention to that, particularly when I went overseas, that, because I was going to tell them what jail I might end up in. Indonesia or Brazil. Some other shithole in the world. But my the family part of this is important. My oldest son Ross, you know, we had some problems with him when he was about 15 or 16. And, you know, the guys in that program told me to, you know, that you're being fearful and that you have to give up to God. And he talked about the Abraham Isaiah story. And, you know, that meant so much to me that you have to be willing to give that child to God. You have to be able to let go and let him find his way. And that was difficult, and that was a big moment for me. I think my trusting God changed at that point. It became real stuff at that point. You know, the other stuff is, you know, let go, live, and let God know, you know. When you had your own child, it's the most precious thing you have, besides the other three. Kind of go to the dogs. You know, that's difficult, but I had to do it. He had to learn his way. So my daughter Renee went through a few things, and we had some painful times, but you know, it was agony, pure agony for me. But she's a beautiful young lady, teacher, a wonderful mother, with a wonderful husband, and a gorgeous granddaughter right there. And she's due in May with her second daughter. And my son Randon, who's my number 2 son, right when I had sobered up, he was 2. And at 3, we started seeing some things when he was 2, and then about 3, we finally started working with some speech therapists and stuff, and they diagnosed him with autism at that point. So sometimes I think maybe that's why God put these things in there, so we could deal with that, because it's a challenge raising a special needs child. And it affects the whole family. It's like a V8 engine, all right, with one of the cylinders not firing properly. You know, that's what raising a special needs child is like. And it took a lot from the whole family to help us raise that child. Marie was an absolute, her strength and bravery trying to marshal all of us around that was incredible. And couldn't have done it without her by any means. And then my number 3 son, Travis, he's still seeking. He's still trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. He's 36. But he's got to move through his spirits. I guess ego, we kind of get into the ego, and about 10 years after we moved from New Orleans, a friend of mine had moved, been transferred from New Orleans to Houston. He said, hey, let me meet you for lunch one day, and I've told the story. Let me meet you for lunch. And so we met at a bar on Westheimer. He said, you want a beer? You know, we were sitting at the bar. You want a beer? No, sure, give me a Diet Coke. Then he had another beer. He said, you want a beer? I said, no, I'm good. Then he got ready to order. He said, you sure you don't want a beer? And for some reason, which I was not a virtue seeker, or, you know, I never told people about not drinking. I was never asked to. I said, Chuck, I don't know if you remember, but in '88, you know, I quit drinking. And he looked at me and he said, you mean all those golf tournaments, all those fishing tournaments, all those bar crawls we did, all those weekends, traveling and stuff that we did, we were over there, you weren't drinking? And I said, no. And he said, took a sip of his beer and said, I never noticed. And that's the truth. And that was another big moment for me, because that kind of took the ego part of the deal with. God's will, or no, excuse me. Dave Paget, he's passed on now, used to say in the Hilton Road meeting that continued is the most important word in the big book. And I had to look it up. It's mentioned 77 times in the big book, and 86 in the 12 and 12. And that's the perseverance part of this program. We continue to work these programs. It's not a one and done deal. If you're sitting still, you know, it's not going to work. You've got to keep moving ahead. And then the other, God's will was always another baffling part of the program for me, because I was trying to do the right things, but I had this vision of God's will was something for me to do out in the future. And I never could draw that down right. And for some reason, Ron Kay, big Ron Kay, was leading the meeting, and he said it, and I wrote it down. It kind of struck me. God's will for you is to do the right thing right now. And for some reason that day, I was listening. The teacher will appear. That was a huge deal. That sign we got up in there about the green one and about rocketed into the fourth dimension. I was rocketed in the fourth dimension. And from an engineering standpoint, the dimensions are width, depth, height. But the fourth dimension is time. Typically. Got an engineer there, I'll be sure. But it's time right now. And that changed the whole model for me as a croak. So now it's just a series of stringing days along, fall down, get back up. How do you do that? The tools, things that people try to teach us in the program, the power of the pen, try to write essays, notes, pleas in my journal. It's a big part of my life. Let you think about, if you're thinking crazy stuff, you put it down on paper, you say, okay, it is crazy stuff. But it lets you kind of process it and kind of work through it. But when you retire at night, the forgotten paragraph in the big book, to me, is on page 86. When we retire at night. And since I really learned that is the first part of step 11. We always recite on awakening. But the way the book says it, for all the book helpers, step 11 starts with when we retire at night. Because what you're doing is having a review, not a remorseful review. It's not another 10th step. You're just looking at what's happened during the day, and saying, why do I do that? It's the conversation with God. And that changed my life. I started paying attention to that because it's a conversation at that point. And it's important. Step 10 is a tactical part of the day when you operate on principles. Our mission statement you have been given. Step 11, part A, is the strategic review. It's the after-action report. How'd you do that day, and what can I do better? What's driving this guy? What's happening? You ask for forgiveness. You identify corrective measures, and you're ready for the 24 hours ahead of you. So you're waking up with a clear, clean slate at that point. But you gotta clean that up, I think. The other part of the program that's important is read deeply and widely. Classics. They're not classics for just kind of a silly liberal arts thing. They've been around for thousands of years, and a lot of the things that we see in the pages here are in those classics. You have a chance to see what somebody else has. The people that wrote this learned those classics. They had a liberal education. I'm able to triangulate on my journey. In other words, you read the book, you read some other stuff, or you have an experience in the day, and it lets you have that kind of third eye to say, what's going on here? How did I handle that? How did I see that? So for all the logicians in here, the Euclidean triangle is 180 degrees, all the interior angles, and they all add up. And there's a logical consistency to that, and that's the important of getting that third perspective on things. Talking to your sponsor, reading other literature, but that gives you some logical consistency on what's going on. Write about it, accept the mystery of it all. The other thing I try to do is keep notes. I go into a meeting, I feel like I'm naked when I'm in there if I don't have a pen and paper to write down. Because people say things that are gobsmacking a lot of times. When I come to a meeting, I'm driving down the road, wherever I'm going, and say, hey, what am I going to learn today? And and somebody says something, and it's interesting because you can ask yourself, what do you really believe about that? Do you really believe that? And that's the reflection. That's the kind of dissecting the stuff. People kind of say aphorisms or something, but let's think about it. So you try to be curious. Page 99 is the other big thing for me. I learned this from Julian. These things will come to pass naturally in a good time, provided, however, the alcoholic continues to demonstrate that he can be sober, considerate, and helpful, regardless of what anyone says and does. That's an axiom. That's a law. Regardless. That's not saying maybe. Our challenge is to accept what's going on around, regardless of what anyone says or does. And that's a challenge. I know I've had trouble with it, but it means a lot to me. Moving ahead a little bit in the 24. Let me another thing. I was talking a little bit about the spiritual journey. And I'm a little sales guy, and lobbyist, and all this stuff. I felt like I needed to have a PowerPoint or something like that. But I couldn't, so I made I had to have it. Sometimes I think I have a trademark this. But on the y-axis is percentage. And that is a measure of your relationship with God. Where are you? From 0 to 100%. Are you working? Okay? And on the x-axis is time. And for me, this was a way, as I was sitting there looking at my life, this I've done years ago. I was probably maybe 40% in a relationship with God. I grew up in the church. It was good. I didn't have a lot of bad people, and maybe I got lucky because I could kind of suss out who the bullshitters were. But I was probably rolling along there. And then 18, that incident in the Marine Corps, Sergeant Wilson. That jumped up at that point. I wanted to have a relationship with God. But the more I used self-will, trying to earn my way into a relationship with God, as my age went along, my relationship got further because I was in self. And unfortunately, when you drop below the X line, the X you're in despair, and you're in a negative area. And that sucks. That's the deep, dark depression, yada, yada, yada. And when I came into the rooms, at age 34, that relationship started to, it's getting better and better every day. So that's my one. On March 30th in the 24-hour book, I just finished here. It's one of my favorite passages. It says, starts off in the meditation for the day. Be calm, be true, be quiet. And if there's not a better motto in the world in AA, that encompasses it as much as anything. You know, you be calm. Anger is temporary insanity. You're not in control of your emotions. All right? Be true is be true to these principles you're trying to learn in this program. In and out of these rooms. And be quiet. Bobby J has a more profane way of saying it. Is, shut the F up. And I agree. Be quiet. There's nothing I can say that will really contribute to this stuff. It's amazing how you can keep your mouth shut and just watch people self-destruct around you. It's incredible. So the other part of this deal is, how do you get along in life? And I had to bring this. How do you get by? How do you not drink? All right? And for me, it's just there's some absolutes on it. These are my dog tags that the Marine Corps gave me. And it's got your ID tag, all right? And the red one is my allergy to penicillin, okay? And it tells corpsmen or whatever not to give me any penicillin because I'd swell up like a Goodyear blimp while they die. But I've added this one, 24-hour shift, because that's my warning to myself not to do that. I don't carry this around, but I keep it, right, because it means so much to me. So, I'd like to thank my family for my support, my friends, fellowship of this AA, my Tuesday night big book study, the guys at Duncan Road, here at Alana, the 6:30 meeting. Made my, I guess you got your plug in. But there's a better one not better. I do on Mondays, Thursdays, and now Friday at 4 o'clock. So y'all can cover that one. We're gonna make that a big one too. But that's the reason you show up. Who can you meet? Who can help? Try to carry the story and go from there. I couldn't have done it without you. All the love and wisdom in this room. I'm just ever grateful for that. And thank you. And with that, I will be quiet, which is the third part of that. So, thank you.
No, it's great. First PowerPoint I've ever seen, and